let's talk about what you need to understand about source available in order to manage risk. A lot of the issues are very similar to open source licensing. With open source, you need to do security review. Well, you need to do that with any software that's in your product. But source available licenses have license notices requirements, which are very similar to open source licenses. By the way, we who draft these licenses try to make them easier to comply with than open source licenses, for instance, allowing you to put a URL rather than the whole license. But it's the same kind of process. If you redistribute a product that has one of these elements in it, you need to pass on a license notice. And the general need for a software bill of materials, of course, is not entirely about licensing. It's about a lot of things plus licensing. But the main issue is that with source available licenses, you need to make sure you can comply with the license restrictions. You would not have that issue with an open source license. So, for example, if a source available license says only non-production use, you're going to have to figure out how you're going to maintain that control within your organization. And a lot of organizations tell me, and I think this is right, that once you approve software for use within an organization, it gets very hard to control how it's used within the organization. Excuse me. If you look at the way this played out with proprietary software like end user licenses over the last 30 years, people developed software management tools that would go and make sure that you were only using the number of users or servers or whatever that you were allowed to use under the license. But no such thing really exists with something like a non-production use restriction. And so you have to do some human intervention to make sure you've got policies and processes in place to make sure that you continue to comply. It's easy for software to come into your organization and then have somebody, on a dev team say, oh, well, we're using this here. I can use it for this purpose too. And that might not be true. The next thing is that source available licenses are not standardized. One of the things about open source, in addition to the fact that it has no restrictions and, so it means you're free to use the software for whatever you want. That's a great benefit. Another great benefit is the actual significant amount of standardization with open source licenses. So although there are hundreds of them, most of the software is under about 6 of them. And so it's very easy to make assumptions about what the license terms say and understand what the license terms say because there are actually so few of them that people use with any regularity. Source available licenses you have to review on an ad hoc basis, just like you would with a proprietary license. And then source available licenses are almost always implemented by private companies and usually in a dual licensing model or some other business model where the company wants to make money from the software. So for instance, if I'm a company and I release software under a source available license that says no commercial use, and you want to use it for commercial purposes, you have to come back to me and negotiate a separate custom license with me. That's a double-edged sword because on the one hand, if you want to use the software in a way that is not allowed by the license, then you can probably negotiate a license to do that because mostly the companies will negotiate terms. That's kind of easier than some open source licenses. For instance, if you find a big project under GPL and it's a community project and you want to use it under other terms, you would not be able to negotiate an alternative license. The project cannot or will not usually provide alternative terms. On the other hand, the companies that release open source, that release source available code are usually doing some enforcement activity because they're shoring up their rights. And so you should expect that it's a little more common to have actual enforcement actions from private companies. By the way, those are not usually lawsuits. They're usually just letters saying, we understand that you're using this in violation of license. You need to get a license. Here's the fee for it. And you might be able to negotiate the fee, but as an overarching matter, if you can't live with the terms of a source available license, that's a problem you can solve with money. And that's always a double-edged sword. It's good to be able to solve problems. It might be painful to pay, but at least there is a solution.